Hey guys, I'm Rebecca. You have a chance to win this DJI FPV drone, the case, and 2 batteries. We're gonna choose one of the next 100,000 subscribers to be our lucky winner. So please subscribe, good luck, and happy FPV.
Welcome to a very special episode of Drone Camps RC. Today we're going to check out the drone industry 5 years ago and see where we are and where we have come in that 5 years. It's amazing how far we've come to where we are today with AIO flight controllers. We have high-powered micro receivers that are open source now, that are in competition with TBS Crossfire. We might have thought it would never happen, but it finally did happen. Still a work in progress, I know, but we are so far ahead of where we were. We are light years ahead of 5 years ago. So we're going to take a deep dive into Rotor Drone magazine, and it says display until January 17th, 2017. Kind of funny, but I've been holding this magazine for quite some time now and wanting to break it out once we hit that 5-year mark and just show you where we are today as compared to the old days. My kids call it the olden days, and they think that the olden days are like a year ago or 2 years ago, which is kind of scary, you know, but the mind of a 6-year-old, you know. So we're gonna dive into this magazine today, and I hope you enjoying the Drone Camps channel. Over 8 years on YouTube now, and just constant daily grind and drone reviews. New product reviews, cameras, toy drones, airplanes, wings, RC cars, crawlers, all kinds of stuff, games. We're talking about tech stuff like new blockchain and DeFi apps, and we'll get more into that a little bit later. Crypto coins, stable coins, altcoins, even some crypto trading as well coming up in the future on this channel. We're gonna dive deep into tech on the Drone Camps channel coming up. So stay tuned and fasten your seatbelt. I'm gonna take you back into memory lane in the Rotor Drone magazine 2017 edition, and I'm sure you're gonna get some laughs. Sit back and enjoy. All right, guys, let's go ahead and take a deep dive back just 5 years ago to show you how far we have come in the FPV racing, freestyle, and the drone industry. We're talking everything here multi-rotor. We'll talk a little bit about fixed wing. We'll talk about some of the gear that's in this magazine as well. In comparison to, I mean, some of the stuff we have nowadays, it's kind of crazy. Now we've moved on to open source ELRS, and this is, just to give you a comparison before we get started in this magazine, this is the flat antenna receiver from Beta FPV. And this one came out, you know, probably about a month ago now. I didn't show it on the channel, but I really do need to do a review on this thing. You can grab these from Beta FPV. They're super tiny, but the point of this one was that you had a flat antenna to include inside your tiny Whoop builds. The original they came out with was the tower, which was a ceramic antenna. It stood up off the top of the receiver, and some guys complained they wanted something that was easier to fit inside small spaces. So there we go. The tiny, like maybe 2 grams flat antenna receiver, and you can see some testing on that one. It did just as good as some of the other antennas out there, which is kind of crazy. And also, some of you guys might not know what this is. This is basically a security camera from back in the day that was converted to be used as an FPV camera. CCD cameras back in those days were on boards like this. They were soldered up, and this is the original type of FPV camera, and the resolution on these was terrible. I think it was something like 480p or something like that. And you know, yeah, 480 used to be a thing, you guys. But it had multiple JST harnesses on the back. It had, I believe it was a 5-volt power option for this camera, and they were very easy to blow up. But you know, just check out something like the RunCam Racer. This one came out a few years ago. In comparison, that's kind of wild, right? That we've come this far. I mean, look at that. The lenses have even changed a ton. You could take these lenses off and replace them, but most times when you crash with this, if you just looked at this camera wrong, it would break. And it had these thin little PCB across the back that you had to mount to, and
yeah, we were forever replacing these. They would get super dirty, all the chips are exposed, and then they came along with something like the secondary size cameras, which were really nice. This is the Runcam Sparrow, still quite a bit bigger than the micro class cameras. As you can see, and some of these size cameras are still out there, but they're not as in high demand as the nano cams are nowadays. And we also had things like the innovations like the split from Runcam, recording something like 1080p onto a DVR from your onboard camera. So it was kind of combination sport cam / analog video back to your goggles. And here's another example of a crazy FPV camera, circa, these are also like circa 2014, by the way. So we're diving deep here. These came out of my shop, and I do have boxes and boxes of really old gear. Someone mentioned like, man, you should do an FPV museum. I have tons of nostalgic stuff from our hobby. And from some of the main manufacturers in our drone community. Everybody from camera drones to FPV guys, all of the drones. So this is funny, this episode, or this guide came out in 2016, and it was on newsstands starting in November and December in 2016. It's kind of funny because it's the 2017 gear guide. Used to make people mad when they would do this type of stuff because they're forecasting an entire year, but they know what's coming up because these new releases will be around for the first and second quarter until they were releasing new stuff in the next year, later half of the year of 2017. But first page, getting into this, guys, kick back and relax because this is fun for me. And if you're brand new to our hobby, welcome to the fun sport of FPV and drone flying. This is one of the first original release it to the public bind and fly or ready to fly kits that Horizon Hobby sold. This was under the Blade series manufacturer, and this was the Inductrix FPV. I believe this was a version 2 that came out. They ran on Spectrum receivers. It had analog video on there. It did have a fixed camera on it, but it's such a wide field of view that you really didn't need to turn it up or down. I think I remember flying this one in a bar in like a little tiny whoop multi-GP race back in the day. We were just having some fun with some LED gates and stuff at the bar. We had a lot of fun with these. This was a fun little quad, and it was around, I think it was around $89, but they had a 2-page ad here, so they spent big bucks in the Rotor Drone magazine. And it's just fun to scroll through these pages and see some of the stuff that's in here. I mean, look at this. This is the, I believe it's the Phantom 3 here. I don't believe it's the 4. This might have been the version before the 4. Different style motors. It had the push-on twist lock props. I called this one the flying pillow. The flying pillow, because it almost looked like a meme itself. So funny looking, this quad. The evolution from this version, from the 2 and the 3, was just so funny to me. But I still have this one over here. I have a Phantom 4 Obsidian. I don't know if you guys remember the Obsidian version, but the Obsidian version was this cool black, and I love the finish on this drone. And look at that camera. I believe this is when they finally came out with like the 1-inch sensor in the back of this camera, and this is still a really nice drone. And I'm gonna try to charge up the batteries, and we'll fly that one together coming up on the channel just for funsies. Also the Zero, this one doesn't exist anymore. This one dried up, and that one was I believe it was 3DR. Do you guys remember 3DR? If you don't remember 3DR was coming out around the time that DJI was coming up and Unique was coming up. So we had 3 main companies, and we also had Parrot kind of playing around in FPV and drone industry, and they made mostly kind of Best Buy quadcopter, toy drone type stuff. They made some good stuff in the future, but this was more for like retail people, just the everyday flyer. And these are still out there, even though they stopped making them. People still love this Disco. This was a Disco FPV plane. The Zero went the way of the Buffalo, but 3DR stuff had a ton of options in it. It made Phantoms kind of look like the everyday guy's drone. And this was the everyday guy's drone, still is. And they're still, I mean, they're dominating the industry. They shut down Unique. Back in the day, there was a war between Unique and DJI. And DJI was actually suing Unique back in those days. So much drama in the industry back then. Even still, people are, you know, it's dog eat dog out there in business. So, man, you had manufacturers fighting, you had shops fighting. I was a shop back in those days in 2014, and I had my own rivals. I won't mention any names, but you know, I had my own fights going on between retailers, and we all tried to stick together for the most part. But you know, business is business. This is a full page ad for Parrot Disco FPV. That's pretty cool too. We also have some other guys, and I don't even know who those dudes are. Hobbyco releasing their flight simulator, their RF Real Flight X back in those days. Typhoon H, this Typhoon H ad, and check out the size of this transmitter. You know, Unique, I gotta say, I gotta hand it to Unique. They put up a good fight against DJI. And this drone, still to this day, I have a Facebook group that is very active for the Typhoon H. People love this drone, and I still have it. They sent me one, and I was so appreciative when this thing came through the door. They sent me like 4 batteries on it. This little transmitter, not little, huge, it actually ran Android, so this can be updated to the latest and greatest version of Android, and you could put all kinds of stuff on there, but DJI eventually took them out. The Mavic series was just too hard to compete with, and there you can see the debut of the Mavic Pro right there. Isn't that cool? It was New York City on September 26, 2016. That was when they raised the curtain on the newest camera drone, the Mavic Pro. How about that? Isn't that cool? And now look where we are today with the Mavic Minis and all that good stuff. The Mini 3 is coming out, and then over here we have what was coined the egg drone. I mean, this was some crazy CES stuff right here, and I miss CES. The amazing power egg. Come on, it doesn't even say what the price of this thing was. But if anybody has a power egg out there, please let me know, because this is the most alien looking thing I've ever seen, and I don't believe those exist anymore, quite truthfully. And A-Main Hobbies getting into the game, of course. Full page double spread there. Vector 280. What company is that? High-Tech, for crying out loud. So this was their version, High-Tech's version of an FPV race quad. And back in those days, we had these crazy, you'll see in this magazine, when I look back through this magazine, it was amazing to me, because you'll notice that we don't really do race canopies anymore. And I hold up my fingers, you know, in quotations, race canopies. Kind of silly, but it was a thing back then for the manufacturers that didn't quite get it, and we'll talk about that a little bit later in this magazine. But we had some crazy stuff going on with multispectral camera photography, with using FLIRs on large agricultural drones, and that was a whole industry and still is. We got our man, the owner, the CEO, the godfather of FPV here, the mainland retailer, Tim Nilsson here. Very, very awesome pioneer in the early days of FPV. He is still sending out stuff, and I'm not sure if Tim is still the CEO of Get FPVs. I haven't talked to Tim in a while, but man, he really changed the game for so many multi-GP race guys, because most of us were getting Lumenier quality gear from Tim and Get FPV back in those days. So really awesome gear. And this was an early edition freestyle drone right here, the QAVR series, as it was called. And check that out. That frame right there is flat profiles you can get right there. Super simple, almost like Mario Brothers simple. Really flat unibody frame with like 6 standoffs there. We started using plastic standoffs to begin with, and we ended up moving over to aluminum standoffs because plastic just broke every time we touched the ground. But the early days of GoPro couches on this one, probably 2205 series motors before we really got up into 2308 series motors. So much change. Lux flight controllers there, they were sending out people. And back then you had PDBs and ESCs that were out on the arms. So most of us are starting our ESCs to the PDB, and then from the PDB, the power distribution board, up to the flight controller, and your ESC, VTX, receiver, all that good stuff. Over here we had the Mr. Steel Edition, purple Lumenier Special Edition motors. I had a set of these. that I still do in my box. One of my favorite pilots of all time, Mr. Steele. And Sharpoo, of course, back in those days, Carlos. We had some Lumenier gear, and I also wanted to show you guys, when I saw this magazine and I look back at this, man, this was interesting because, you know, these QAVRs are about as simple as they get, and I talk about in my reviews a lot. We talk about long body design, and these are kind of squash X, but usually true X setup on these. They also had H setup, they had stretch X, and so we were experimenting with so many different types of frames back in those days, and it really was quite innovative. We had huge receivers on there. These are probably D4R early free sky receivers. Most people were still using Spectrum back in those days practically, but you had to use the D4R2, I believe it was, that we were using huge tall antennas, and they had a pretty good range on those, but so simplistic frames. And if you look at a modern frame today, like this hasn't changed a whole lot. Still a flat bottom plate. We've got replaceable arms, of course, super skinny LEDs built into this one, a flat top plate, classic long body design again. Even in like 2022, we're still rocking the long body design, and it's just a continuing tradition in the FPV craze. You know, we had some Phantoms back in those days being outfitted with multispectral cameras for environmental use and agricultural use, and that's still happening. DJI was getting into the videography scene huge in the US back in those days, just starting to really take off. And we have a silly article called Drone Cowboys. It's kind of funny, but these guys have some hardcore multi-lift, multi-use helis, old school Zenmuse gimbals on there from DJI. And this is a great ad right here. Hobbyco. Look at this. Is that me? Who is that? The hoodie guy. Looks like a crypto dude or something. You know, this stereotypical bad boy. And they kind of labeled us the bad boys back in those days. Hobbyco. Just add adrenaline. Okay, Fusion Extreme Race Pack, and you know what? The guys over at Hobbyco worked with me. They sent me one of these for a demo, and I casually reviewed it for new people. And in my channel, man, I try to keep it simple on the channel. I try to speak people speak and keep things simple so people understand it. But back in those days, they were doing around 250 was the standard size for most quads out there. And this thing was kind of a beast. It had a huge body on it, long body design there. It was all encased. It kind of had that racer look again that a lot of these companies were doing. And everything was included in this box. The goggles, the controller, the right-hand circular polarized antenna, the little flip up and flip down camera. You could fly at line of sight first, like I always recommended, then flip the camera up. So, you know, they were redesigning the wheel with a lot of these. They didn't need to get quite as fancy as they did. And this one, you know, I believe they had half a warehouse of these things sitting around after they came out because a lot of people didn't buy them because they were kind of big and slow. The Nanook cases, very popular, and I think people still using these for film and camera gear. Very professional cases, really expensive cases. And this was the Ghost drone. Check it out, inverted Phantom 3 style drone. Kind of funny and pretty nostalgic to me. I did get some stuff from eHang at some point. I might have had one of the original Ghost drones on the channel. And this is funny to me. Ares Z-Line race quad. So, wow. This was when they were using tube arms, and they were also using my most hated piece of hardware in my entire drone career was the infamous bullet nut. I hated these things with a passion. You would screw them on using a screwdriver through a hole in the very top, and sometimes the top of the threading would break and it would come through the aluminum if the aluminum was manufactured too soft, and you could never get them tight enough and they would freaking fly off. So kind of funny that like this manufacturer, just, you know, Hobbytown, it was available at Hobbytown, go figure, 560 grams, 12 amp ESCs, 12 amp ESCs, 15 amp peak. So probably running a 3S battery on this race quad. And it's also, it's funny. This is named the Crossfire. Anybody talk to Trappy about this release? Did Trappy work with Hobbytown on that? Trappy is the owner of TBS Crossfire, TBS Black Sheep. Yeah, I'm pretty sure Black Sheep didn't approve the Crossfire Aries Z-Line Racing, tube-armed, yeah, whatever. We're moving on to FLIR Duro here. FLIR was getting big in the competition for the multi-spectrum market, and they dominate. But also really fun for me, like check this out, you guys. This is cool. Now, early 2000s, I was a huge 3D pilot and heli guy. So I was building helis and working with flight controllers back then, building everything in line and getting into SAB Goblin later, but they decided to release their own quadcopter, and they never sent me one of these. Like I emailed Align, and for some reason, because I wasn't Alan Samsbo Jr. or whatever, or Tariq, they just didn't care about drone camps, and they never sent me one of these. But then again, tube arms on here, these manufacturers just didn't get it. Bullet nuts again on the top of the motors. They had shrouded, shrouds around the outside of the motors, but again, they have that silly race style canopy over the top of it, trying to make it look fast sitting there. They were also using bi-blade props, which, back in these days, these ESCs were a little bigger. They were 25 amp max, but it says 3 and 4S on this one. So at a point, we were only flying 3S on 250 size race quads, guys. So back in 2014, 2015, we started transitioning over to using 4S, and then we had 5S quads, and then now we have 6S is like the norm. So, I mean, we even have new guys starting out on 6S, which is kind of crazy. Now, this is way down nostalgia lane for me. So this was created by my buddy Trent, very young man who worked for Unique. Went over to China on a trip, worked at the factory, designed this one from the ground up to be something that could be easily packable. And this was kind of geared toward the selfie market or whatever, for the everyday person to just take a selfie with. They even had a selfie mode on here. And the camera, the video was not very, it was okay to subpar as far as the video quality. So that one sold a ton of units though. And also, check it out, we have Horizon Hobby coming into the game back in 2016 with their Theory X, and this is a True X high stack. This was one of the original GEP RC chimp style frames right here. This was a kind of a thing back in those days. True X was really big for racing, and check out these props. Now these are old school props. Huge wide chord, rounded tips. Yeah, so we've moved on from those props, and even at the time, I was flying a lot of HQ props, and they didn't look anything like what Horizon was offering with this $350 quadcopter. Blade Conspiracy Quad was their long body design. Again, it was kind of short and stocky with sidewalls. And, look at the Nazgul 5 nowadays. We still have the sidewalls still around, still have flat top plates. I don't like the fact that they did this hard mount right in the middle, because it kind of makes it really tight to get your camera in there. But, then again, the most depressing thing about this whole design was the hard mount right-hand circular polarized antenna off the back. This baby right here, first crash, broke off. I told manufacturers back in those days, just knock this stuff off. This hard mount on the top, the RPSMA right there, just break right off. Really a bad design. So we've moved on from that. Back in those days, we were actually zip tying them to the back posts and then having them come out and bend up like that. So when they hit, they bend back instead of ripping off the quad. And we were using extensions as well to do that. But Autel Robotics, check that out. This is the nostalgic orange copter, and wow, doesn't that look a lot like the DJI Phantom? Autel was really trying to compete with the Phantom back in those days, because Phantoms were selling like crazy in 2016. And this is the X Star series, came in at $900, and now you can barely get any Autel for $900 unless it's one of the minis. So that's a pretty good size drone there for that price. We also had some kind of line of sight 3D machines, and this was made by Helimax, a voltage 500mm reversing. It had motors that reversed the direction, and it would flip upside down, kind of like a 3D heli. And the original Parrot Bebop in here for $900 with a controller and a case and everything. It's kind of a crazy price. GDU, don't remember them that much. Another eHang article here, and $8.99 for that one. And check this out. This one kind of flew like a drunk guy driving a Cadillac. This was a Unique Typhoon Q500 4K. It was a $1,500 ready-to-fly drone. People had giant cases. This was a really big aircraft, and it sounded really cool taking off. And I never got one of the Zeros, unfortunately. but you know, zero drone. Oh well. And then we have Traxxas, which most people don't realize. Traxxas made some of the first multi-rotors out there in the little bind and fly kits that were just made to fly indoors. One of my first quadcopters when I was first getting into it was this little tiny one. They even had some high-tech cameras back in those days for drones that were coming out. And this was a $210 camera that only did 1080p, 8 megapixel shooting. So guys, you can be happy about your Insta360 Go now, or your Go 2 in comparison to this thing, because this thing was like this, maybe the size of a GoPro, and had a tiny little lens. Not so great video on here, but it was a compact cam. And back then I was using a Mobius in place of that. And this is the View Pro by FLIR that would fit on a Phantom. That was brand new back in those days. Also fitting on the Inspire 1. And we had Venom ad in here. This is some of their original Venom batteries that they sent me, and these were the best. The new Venom batteries, not so great. They puffed on me on a recent box that I got from them, so not super happy. But these old ones I still have, and it must have been made at a different, maybe a different factory or something. Oh God, oh God! Everybody take a shot right now. Every time you see this come up on the screen, take a shot. Just to be able to talk about these, I need to take a shot. These are the Vuzix eyewear video headphones. They kind of look like, you know, Oculus Rift now, but without these giant earmuffs. Guys were wearing these at the field for FPV races, and everybody wanted these back in the day. These were $500, and I begged for these for months, and finally, after everybody and their dog had reviewed it, they finally sent me a pair of these, but mine didn't even work that great. I couldn't even get them to turn on, and they had problems from like the first time I took them out of the box. I mean, can you imagine in the middle of the summer wearing these giant earmuffs on top of your head while you're doing FPV racing? You would just be dying in this pair of goggles. They had this huge head strap over the top. Like I always would take the head straps off of a lot of these goggles, even for the one that goes over vertical. I never liked that. So this one was just huge. It was cumbersome, and I just never got into using them. And speaking of gigantic, now we're going to go back into memory lane, and we're going to talk about the Quantums, because the Quantums were some of the cheapest goggles you could get. The other ones that I just showed you, they were $500. These were $28, and this was the set of Quantum 2 goggles. If you wanted to look like Rick Moranis from Honey, I Shrunk the Kids and look like a complete dork in the field, wear these. They had a pretty big screen on them, I believe around a 5-inch screen. They were expandable. They had a retractable magnifier that went in and out right here. It had a little push button. You had to add your own receiver on here and antenna, but it came basically 2 pieces of block of foam. You would glue them together and put this sort of neoprene around it, sandwich everything together, and you had a pair of FPV goggles. And back in the day, I saw a lot of people using these mainly because they were so cheap, but people seem to like this set of goggles, and I wore them. It was like looking at like an IMAX movie screen. It was huge, and my eyes were it would just mess with my eyes too much to wear box goggles. And if you don't know what box goggles are, it's just one big screen in front of your eyes, unlike a set of binocular style goggles. Binocular style goggles have just been better for me, but the Quantums, man, those were pretty popular with a lot of people. FPV racers, fixed wing FPV guys using them. A good friend of mine had this set, and he looked like a dork for years, and probably still has his pair of these and his old pair of shoes that he used to wear and his hat back then. Probably still has everything in his garage. But yeah, Hobby King was killing it with those back in the day, and I haven't seen these in years, so it's cool to see the Quantums. You know, make a comment down below if you had some Quantums. A lot of people did. This was another Traxxas quadcopter here. This was the Aerial Acrobat Aten series, and they show it racing through gates here, doing flips and rolls, chasing and filming T-Max Extreme car there, and DX6E, and no one really uses Spectrum that much for FPV racing. So this is interesting. This is labeled racing drones here. So now this will show you a lot about our industry. This says a lot about big manufacturers trying to get into the trenches of the hobby, but also still sell to the average guy. That was a kind of a big thing. They wanted to make something that looked as cool as, say, something that Sharpoo made himself, or Mr. Steel, or myself, or say Bardwell. But look at this, you guys. This is the Lumenier Sharpoo edition freestyle FPV drone. It has a flat bottom plate here. It has the bent up antenna on the back, which is actually underneath the top plate. So it was made to like bend down if you hit. Here's another vertical mount on this one. This is Hi-Tech's Quad Racer 280. So this is 280 millimeters motor to motor. This was the Vector 280. This was 400. This was 300. And this was $90 for this frame kit. So most guys were buying a Lumenier frame kit and building up these with like Mr. Steel motors back in those days, or Lumenier motors. Lumenier motors, I think they were like $40 a motor or something. So if you had that set up, you had a premium quad. And I feel like those motors were a little bit soft. They could break pretty easily, but it was a really nice flying machine. And getting really crazy down here in the bottom right. What is that? Does anybody know what that? Can you identify that flying object? Because this thing is crazy. I got a little bit of shadow there, but God, that is the Rize RXS 270. And go back on my channel. They sent me this one for review. I reviewed this thing, man. It flew like a battleship. It was huge. It does. I don't even know what inspired this design, but it had the battery sitting way back here. We have everything looks to be all out of balance, and this frame was like super scary. Extreme speed racer, and this was $230 from Hobbyco. They also created the Rize RXS 255, and this was more of a compact all-in-one, kind of like the other one I showed you, racer, but this was more for like race class people. And this one debuted at $400, and that had 4 ESCs on it with BL Heli firmware, which was very progressive for them back in the day. You know, it ran a 4S 1300, which was what most of us ran. Yeah, so much better quad than this one, but this one also had a stinking vertical top mount antenna on the very top, which would break or have massive hits if you did crash. And then over here, which was an interesting concept, this was kind of like the merge of like foamy airplanes to our quadcopters. This little guy right here, the RDX 250 BL Extreme durability race quad, this was all foam. So, except for the landing gear, it had helicopter landing gear on the bottom of it. It did have a horizontal mount, sort of looks like almost like maybe it's a immersion RC antenna back there. It's kind of cool, a Fat Shark antenna. But yeah, this one never really went anywhere, and neither did most of these. They all kind of dried up, and Lumenier is the only one that still kind of survives out of that pack. I mean, yeah. Go figure. If you don't know the market, then it's hard to get into a market you don't know. So X-Star Premium here, Master of the Sky for Altel Robotics. They had some cases, and they had a white one to look like the Phantom again back in those days, but they've moved on to do the orange, and that's kind of their signature nowadays. And back then, you know what was cool? There was only really one HD system on the market that really got the racer's attention, and back in those days it wasn't DJI, it was Connex ProSight HD Vision Kit. $500 for this receiver right here that you had 4 antennas on, giant antennas. You had to mount this to a tripod. You had to come out of this with an HDMI cable to your in on your goggles, and make sure everything's set up there. And your goggles had to be decent enough resolution to be able to handle ProSight. So a lot of guys didn't buy this, but the guys that did, I know one guy, Clinton, up in Vancouver, and Clinton is a good racer anyway, but he was winning races with this, and at the time it was kind of controversial because they're like, hey, I don't know if you can use that HD system here at the race because everybody else is flying analog, and that kind of gives you an unfair advantage. But Clinton would have an advantage otherwise. anyway because guy's a good pilot. And they also had the Connex Mini, $1,299 HD system with 60 frames per second. So it had 1080p video at 60 frames per second with zero latency, it says, up to a range of 1,600 feet. So 1,600 feet on a system here that costs $1,300. Yeah, that's what happened to Connex. So Connex, are you still out there? I'm still waiting for them to catch up with us. But also the Focal V2s here, probably the most terrible goggles of all time, $400. These were 640 by 480p. Oh, they were extremely low resolution, and I felt sorry for anybody that bought these back in the day. But you know, it is what it is. Version 2. Everybody bitched about the first version that came out because it had a built-in module and it wasn't replaceable. And what was cool at our time, early in the days, was replaceable modules. And you know, one of my first ones was a TBS Crossfire module, 1.5.8 with Fat Shark Dominators, and those were my goggles for years. Aerial Media Pros, they sold a bunch of custom film rigs, really nice stuff. Futaba, I mean, who even flies Futaba anymore? That reminds me of like 1985. But I don't mean to offend anybody. I know a lot of you guys, not a lot of you guys, maybe two of you guys still have Futaba radios. I'm sure some of the older guys have one in their garage they haven't used for 20 years. And then we're getting into things in this magazine, in the very back, in the trenches of this magazine. We're looking at like Dubro, True Spin, prop balancers. Now, I use this for airplanes pretty much only. I had some early emails back in the early days. Guys were like, how do I prop balance my tiny Whoop props? I'm like, dude, you don't need to. If you see a little piece of extra plastic hanging off of it, take a pair of snips and snip it off. But otherwise, you don't balance tiny Whoop props. I don't anyway. If you do, that's totally up to you. They were teaching you about blue thread locker back in those days. That's cool to see that in the magazine. Prop modification tool, not needed. From Turnigy, really. HQ props, you know, they're close enough. They are out of whack, but with current modern flight controllers, you really don't need it. They have a 4-blade propeller set. This was like the early days of 4-blade props coming out, and they also moved on to like 5-blade and stuff. The Dromeda. Now, I remember this one, you guys. This was a big series right here. Dromeda. Very nostalgic for a lot of new people. It got a lot of people started with drones, and a lot of airplane guys at the AMA field started out with Dromedas. That one's pretty cool. Getting to the very back of this gear guide, we're in the trenches now, and look what's all the way in the very back, you guys. You won't even recognize this drone. Does anybody recognize this? Raise your hand if you do. This is the GoPro Karma, and it came in at a street value, drone only, gigantic drone, $799. Come on. And it also came with the camera, the built-in like take in and out modular camera. You can put it on a gimbal on a stick or whatever and film your girlfriend on a mountain bike. $1,099. So it was right around the same price as the Phantoms back in those days. But when GoPro came out with this, I started laughing as soon as I saw the keynote, because oh my God, do you guys remember the picture of the guy like going like, oh, like I wish I could just Google it, like find a picture of this guy. Like he was so stoked. The CEO of GoPro was so stoked on the release of the Karma. He was just like, it's the best drone ever. Oh! I'm like, no, dude, it's not. It's gonna burn. It's gonna fail. It's gonna crash and burn, and you're gonna have a warehouse full of these things left, because my guys in the drone industry will not like this, and we didn't. Everybody hated it. It was gigantic. It may have had folding arms, but I don't think it did. Even if it did, it was still like it made the Phantom 4 look smaller. And you know what ate its lunch? This came out around the same time as the most iconic DJI drone of all time, the Mavic Pro. The Mavic series has since killed the Phantom series, and that's why you don't really see Phantoms as much anymore, because the Mavic just killed everybody. This original design right here, folding arms and super compact, tiny consumer drone, that's what people wanted. This was a joke, unfortunately. I know some guys out there somewhere in the woods that love the drone, but probably not my guys. The Breeze Unique 4K came out at $499. That was pretty pricey for this little guy, but it was kind of a selfie drone. I might even had some reviews back in the day, early in the day on my channel for selfie drones. And this is Bapu. Bapu, great racer, used Fat Shark, and I believe he was he working with, this is Fat Shark V3s on those, and he was working with Connex, so he has a Connex setup right there for multi-GP FPV racing. And it depended on the race coordinator whether they would let you use the HD back in those days. How controversial HD was, isn't that funny? We had some pretty progressive stuff like APC Props coming out with their ad here with the bi-blade, and this looks like something like out of Avatar or something. We had some cool frames coming out, and manufacturing was like at an all-time high for the drone industry around 2015, 2016. Even 2014, there was tons of new stuff coming out all the time. And my all-time favorite analog antennas right here, these are the Amway left-hand circular polarized and right-hand circular polarized omnidirectional antennas, and they had no shroud on the top, but these were some of the toughest antennas in the history of antennas. And this is interesting. It's a little write-up question and answer series with Tim. It says, can you explain the difference between the cloverleaf and a helical antenna? And he's basically saying a helical antenna, it's this one on the right-hand side of the picture right there. This is more of a directional long-range style antenna, whereas this one is kind of a shorter range omnidirectional, which is sort of the shape like an apple, up, down, left and right, all the way around in a sphere, spherical pattern radiation. And this is more of a kind of a narrow beam out in front of you. So if you flew your plane too far this way or this way, you would run out of your signal, and your camera would go fuzzy, and your VTX would lose signal. And these are some of the early antennas as well, without any type of cap on them. They used to make some caps back in the day, and they had a hard time. It's really funny. They had a hard time making a cap that would stay on, because every time you crashed, the top would pop off. Yeah, so we've come a long ways. And back here we had IDE, an ad for the International Drone Expo business conference. That was in LA. Super cool. And I believe Multi-GP might have been at that one as well. So go Chris Thomas there. That's super cool. Chris Thomas is the founder of Multi-GP. And getting the back of the magazine, we're looking at Hobby King right here. Check that out. Hobby King with their Nova Pro under the name Quantum. They sold a lot of these units, and these things, a friend of mine, my friend Jim, had one of these here in town, and I remember him kind of being sheepish about it. He's like, yeah, it's not quite as good as your DJI Phantom, but I can do some filming with it. A cheap little box camera on there, capture your next adventure. And these were it was like the poor man's Phantom. I can't make fun of it too much, because I like cheap stuff. I do. I fly all the cheap stuff on the channel. And some of the most popular cheap stuff out there is still what really sells right now. The Eachine Wizard, originally it was cheap as dirt components. I'm not pimping the Eachine Wizard by any means, but I feel like the Baby Apes and the Ape series quads right now are some of the most dirt cheap quads out there. This company right here is doing great. And this is dirt cheap stuff. This can get you started, but it's not going to be anywhere, like iFlight or GEP RC quality. That's what I usually recommend on my channel. So I appreciate you guys taking a trip down memory lane with me and checking out the 2016 edition of Rotor Drone. We have come a long ways in the drone industry and the FPV racing industry. Multi-GP, Factor, Series Racing, all of those guys that came up through Multi-GP. We have our freestyle guys, and there's just so many layers to our industry, really. So many contacts and so many great people involved in the companies. I got to say a special thanks out to every single person that I have been in touch with in the past 8 years that has made my dreams come true with my passion of RC. My passion with the RC started with airplanes. It moved up into RC helis in the early 2000s. Mid 2000s started doing multi-rotors, and then FPV and drones and racing drones and freestyle and tiny whoops and all of the rest of the stuff in the drone industry. If it flies, I want it. If it's RC, I want it. So yeah, and I'm happy still with an old school pair of analog goggles. I still like analog FPV, and I just hope these companies can survive the manufacturing setback that we've had this year, and we can keep moving forward in the drone industry. So if you're nostalgic about FPV drones and anything that has a camera on it, please do share this video with them, because this was fun taking a look back 5 years ago to where we are now. We have come quite a long way, guys. I'm Justin Davis, one of the Drone Originals, the original drone channel. I will see you on the next one. Take care, guys.